slurping up Felix juice, spreading Venetia's period like a PB&J, and giving back to Mother Earth. Hey, it's Nicole. Welcome to me talking nonstop at you and you being unable to say a thing. We have a great time. Think of this as English class, except instead of a teacher, the person before you is mildly obsessive, not really being paid, and a little dead behind the eyes. So, exactly like a teacher. Today's lesson is about Saltburn. The plot is really simple and not the point at all, so I'm going to do it in 30 seconds. In 2006, a scholarship student named Oliver goes to Oxford and befriends rich kid Felix. Oliver comes from a troubled family with substance abuse and mental health issues, and Felix feels really sorry for him. He invites Oliver to stay at his family's mansion in Saltburn. We see Oliver become more obsessed with Felix and more obviously manipulative as he turns the family members against each other. Felix finds out that Oliver lied about being poor. Oliver kills Felix and gets rid of the other family members one by one until he owns Saltburn. This movie has been pretty controversial online. People generally agree that it's a beautiful movie, but many say that it's a bad script and shallow and has little to offer. So let me go through what I find the most interesting about Saltburn before we address that criticism. Let's talk symbolism, and specifically the Minotaur and Icarus. Part of the grounds at Saltburn is this huge maze that you know is going to be important because it keeps showing up.
Maze.
There are clues in the statues, and the maze is described as a labyrinth so that even the most uncultured viewer, the lowest common denominator, can get the reference. The reference is to Greek mythology, specifically the Minotaur myth. I'm gonna give you a quick crash course. The Minotaur is part man, part bull, and he lives in the center of a labyrinth, aka maze. The Minotaur has a lot of family trauma, what with his mother mating with an actual bull because his dad angered the sea god Poseidon, as one does. Anyway, the Minotaur keeps, unfortunately, eating people, so his dad shuts him in a maze and occasionally sends in his enemy's children as a form of sacrifice, as one does. Then this prince named Theseus volunteers to end the beef, literally. He gets help from the Minotaur's sister in order to get through the maze. He then kills the Minotaur and abandons the sister. He goes home and his father jumps into the sea thinking that his son has died, and the son Theseus becomes the ruler. So the first interpretation, Oliver is Theseus and Felix is the Minotaur. There are some parallels that support Oliver representing Theseus and Felix the Minotaur. Oliver does go into the maze and he kills Felix at the center. There is some cool mirroring in this scene. Everyone is always going on about Felix bringing home a revolving door of commoner friends because he has, a savior complex.
I think I like you even more than last year's one.
He'll get bored of you.
Those commoners are the Minotaur sacrifices, and just like Theseus, Oliver poses as a sacrifice but then infiltrates into the royal family. So you could see it as like a hero story retold to make Theseus a villain. This might not be the most obvious physical comparison since the Minotaur is a monster and Jacob Elordi is an angel, but I see both the Minotaur and Felix as victims and relatively innocent. Like, yeah, the Minotaur ate people, but what was he supposed to do? But even though Felix has a savior complex and other flaws, he clearly tries to be nice and generous. It also seems like no one really agrees on what the Minotaur myth itself represents even outside of Saltburn, but possibly it's the clash between the ideal and the baseness of human nature. Second interpretation, Oliver is both Theseus and the Minotaur, and Felix is Icarus. What's confusing is I could also see Oliver eating the human sacrifices like the Minotaur, since he is kind of consuming them. I've also read that the Minotaur's form in the movie is actually modeled after Oliver's actor. And then there are elements of the Icarus myth, Icarus being, the one where a boy puts on wings and flies too close to the sun and falls to his death. First, you see Felix's angel wings as a costume, and second, his angel tattoo as he's laying in the sun. So you could say that what Saltburn, the place, represents, aka wealth and power, is the sun that Felix has always been too close to, and the light that Oliver is drawn to like a moth to a flame.
I think you're a moth.
This interpretation, however, gets really convoluted when I think about how these Greek mythology characters fit together. Maybe the director Emerald Fennel thought they were just cool symbols to include, and the comparison just doesn't really run that deep, but it's there. Another question that comes up a lot is Saltburn an Eat the Rich movie? Short answer, no. There have been a lot of movies lately about the class divide, Parasite being one of the most famous that comes to mind. The director has said that Saltburn is about the absurdity of class, but I definitely would not classify this one as Eat the Rich, unless you mean this scene, or this scene. There are class elements like Oliver being called a bootlicker and telling Elspeth that, unlike her family, he knows how to work.
It seems like nobody wants to work these days.
But it doesn't seem like class is the main point, and if that was actually the intent, it is a very muddled message. Oliver isn't even poor, so it would be more like middle class versus the upper class, which then would make the message, eat the richer, or rich people, watch out. The Cattons to me were somewhat endearing, even if they view people as replaceable and are out of touch, rude, and bumbling. It's still harmless relative to middle-class Oliver. So, at best it seems like the director is just saying everyone sucks here, which is not the most nuanced take, but I mean, hard to argue with. And at worst, it's upper-class paranoia. I've been seeing a lot of discussion around specifically British classism and how that relates to the director's own upper-class background. But as an American, I have to admit I am completely out of my depth there, so if anyone wants to say something in the comments about that, feel free. So, what is Saltburn actually about then? Early on in the movie, Oliver and Farleigh, Felix's cousin, catfight about Oliver using thus too many times, like the word thus. Oliver then accuses Farleigh of attacking the style versus substance of his essay. And then style versus substance becomes a huge theme in Saltburn. The director has said the film is about what we as an audience are willing to forgive for beauty and charm. The Catton family is obsessed with appearance. Elspeth is terrified of ugliness. They have black tie dinners. They're faux humble and don't discuss their wealth. And the family prattles on about the party after their son dies. But there's more imagery that shows things are not as they seem. Sometimes when Oliver's reflection is shown, his reflections don't match or are fragmented. In this image, you can see the duality between his fake persona that he presents and his reflection. The image is actually upside down, with the reflection on top looking at you as real Oliver is looking at his reflection on the table. And here you can see there are multiple Olivers. There were also a bunch of Headless scenes that drove me crazy because there is no definitive explanation. But my guess is they show his disconnection from the self, like he's lost his head, lost his mind. Saltburn is equally, if not more, about desire and obsession, of wanting what others have and then stopping at nothing until everything is consumed. The almost square aspect ratio of the film is to give the impression of peeping in, just as Oliver's doing being an outsider. In going after what he wants, Oliver consumes, slurping up Felix juice, spreading Venetia's period like a PB&J, and giving back to Mother Earth. And he views sex as a form of domination, which I find is another example of this consumption from lust. The director has said Oliver just wanted what we all wanted, which was to be loved back in the same way.
I can't remember his name.
He's in love with this fantasy, and when that illusion has to be confronted, he is forced to kill Felix in order to keep him, essentially. Style versus substance often comes up in critiques, only people are also using the phrase to say Saltburn itself is all style and no substance, aka it's shallow, which is a great segue. What is wrong with Saltburn? Short answer, a lot. Once you ask even basic questions about the plot, it caves in on itself. Like, most obviously, how did the police not find out he was poisoned, and how is Oliver not in jail? And then in terms of character motivation, why is Oliver even doing all this? The big reveal is that everything Oliver did was premeditated, but we only see Oliver see Felix from afar a couple times before he engineers their first meeting. So why is Oliver so obsessed with Felix and what he represents? He comes from a loving middle-class home, so why does he want the status and wealth that comes from winning Saltburn? What in his character compels all this? You could maybe say that Oliver started off just wanting Felix for whatever reason, maybe because he's so beautiful or he seems so loved by everyone. And then when he actually got rejected, he was like, well, then no one can have him. And then maybe Oliver switched to taking everything else he could if he couldn't have Felix. But the issue with that is his villain monologue makes it seem like it wasn't really about Felix, but more about achieving the life he had.
Unlike you, I actually know how to work.
And speaking of that villain monologue,
But is there really ever such thing as an accident, Elspeth?
why? Saltburn doesn't give a lot of credit to the viewer. Everything in that monologue except for the bike scene was pretty obviously Oliver's doing and felt unnecessarily spelt out. Some stuff just feels like it's not in the right place for this movie. The pacing fell off in that it felt too long and also weirdly rushed from scene to scene and montage to montage. The 3-ish shock value scenes are the reason why everyone is talking about Saltburn on social media, and they aren't entirely gratuitous because they illustrate that all-consuming desire, but maybe they didn't all need to be there to that extent. A character I was intrigued by was Farleigh, Felix's cousin. He adapts this elitist front at school to divert attention from his own circumstances, which are actually real, unlike Oliver's poverty cosplay. And then he constantly picks on Oliver to reclaim the family's focus. And he kind of then drops a line about race, and it's really not addressed again.
Why don't you ask Liam and Joshua?
Who the f*** Liam and Joshua?
You're footmen.
Make it a race thing. I mean, we're your family. We hardly even notice that you're different or anything like that. The turnover for footmen is notoriously high.
Farleigh, as another outsider, has the potential to be really complex. So, in sum, I think it's harsh to say that Saltburn is all superficial, as I have been seeing a lot. There are a lot of beautiful individual elements, but the things Saltburn tries to say just don't feel very cohesive. Okay, after I watch any media, I love running to analysis videos, and a lot of the time I find the real lesson in the comments. So let me know what you thought. Did you feel salty? Did you feel burned? Tell me. Finally, I did upload a reaction video to the film last week if you want to basically watch the movie in a quarter of the time with me. Be warned though, I had audio problems, so please lower the volume to make it sound less terrible. That's all. Bye!